In the burning sun of the ancient world, long before the ideas of democracy or freedom became cornerstones of civilization, the lands of Greece stood as fractured city-states, bound together only by shared language, religion, and myth. But across the eastern horizon, a storm was gathering, an empire so vast, so unrelenting, that the Mediterranean trembled at its very name, Persia. The Persian Empire, under King Darius I, had already conquered lands stretching from the Indus Valley to the shores of Asia Minor. Its armies were countless, its wealth unimaginable, and its ambitions endless. Yet, there was one thorn in the side of this great empire: Greece, a land of small but fiercely independent city-states. When the Athenians dared to defy Persia by supporting the Ionian revolt around 499 BCE, Darius swore vengeance. He sent a massive force westward, and in 490 BCE, the Persians landed on the plains of Marathon. It was there that a shocking event shook the known world. Against all odds, a much smaller Greek army, led by Athens, crushed the mighty Persians in battle. The defeat was humiliating. The Greeks celebrated Marathon as a divine victory, but in Persia, it lit a fire that would not burn out. King Darius vowed to crush Greece entirely, but death claimed him before he could fulfill this promise. His son, Xerxes I, inherited not only the throne but also his father's hatred for Greece. And unlike Darius, Xerxes was determined to leave nothing to chance. Xerxes was a man of immense pride, power, and ambition. He ordered the construction of one of the greatest invasion forces the world had ever seen. Ancient writers, like Herodotus, speak of an army so vast that it drank rivers dry as it marched, numbering in the hundreds of thousands, though historians today debate the true figures. Accompanied by fleets of warships, it was not just an army, it was an empire on the move. Meanwhile, in Greece, whispers of the coming storm spread like wildfire. The city-states argued and bickered as they always had. Athens with its navy, Sparta with its warriors, Corinth with its merchants. Unity was fragile, and time was running out. In Sparta, the warrior society of legend, boys were taken from their families at the age of 7 and forged into soldiers through brutal training, pain, and discipline. To them, fear was weakness, and death in battle was the highest honor. Their kings were not mere rulers, but warrior leaders who fought alongside their men. And among these kings stood a man destined to become immortal, Leonidas I. Leonidas was not just a king, he was a Spartan to the bone. Raised in hardship, trained in the agoge, and tempered by years of war, he understood that survival against Persia required sacrifice. The Persian tide was coming, and Greece needed a shield strong enough to hold it back, even if only for a moment. The Greek council decided that the only hope of survival was to delay Xerxes' vast army long enough for the city-states to gather forces. They searched for a battlefield where numbers would count for little, where the terrain itself would act as an ally. And they found it at a narrow pass called Thermopylae, the Hot Gates. Thermopylae was no ordinary battlefield. On one side lay steep cliffs, on the other the sea. At its narrowest point, the path was only wide enough for a few men to stand shoulder to shoulder. Here, the overwhelming numbers of Persia would mean nothing. Here, courage, discipline, and steel could hold the line. Leonidas understood the gravity of the mission. The Greeks could not hope to defeat Xerxes in open battle, not yet. But they could delay him. A small force would march to Thermopylae, not to win, but to buy precious time. It was a suicide mission, though few would say it aloud. When Sparta was called upon to provide its warriors, the laws of their city complicated matters. A religious festival, the Carnea, forbade the Spartans from sending their full army to war. But Leonidas refused to leave Greece defenseless. He handpicked 300 of his finest warriors, all of them fathers with living sons to carry their legacy. These men knew the weight of their duty. They were not marching to victory, but to immortality. As they set out, the 300 Spartans were joined by allies from other Greek states, Thespians, Thebans, and others, raising their numbers to a few thousand. Still, against the tide of Persia, they were a drop in the ocean. Yet, for these men, it was enough. The march of Leonidas and his Spartans was not silent. Their red cloaks flared in the wind, their bronze shields gleamed in the sun, and their spears pointed forward with deadly purpose. To the people who watched them pass, they were not men, but living embodiments of defiance. Songs would later claim that mothers told their sons, "Come back with your shield," or "on it." And so, as Xerxes' colossal army thundered westward, shaking the earth beneath its sandals, a small band of warriors marched north toward the narrow gates of Thermopylae. Between the endless might of Persia and the fragile freedom of Greece, they would stand. Not for victory, not for survival, but for honor, for duty, and for the idea that even the smallest force, if unbroken in spirit, could defy an empire. The shadow of Persia stretched long over Greece, but within that darkness, a fire had been lit. A fire that would burn at Thermopylae and echo across history for centuries to come. The road to Thermopylae was more than a march. It was a pilgrimage to destiny. Each step taken by Leonidas and his chosen 300 was heavy with the weight of history. These were not ordinary men. They were Spartans, bred for war, sculpted by pain, and trained to obey their king without hesitation. Yet, they were also fathers, husbands, and brothers, leaving behind families who knew they might never return. The choice of Leonidas was deliberate. He did not bring the youngest or the strongest. He brought men who carried within them the wisdom of experience and the knowledge that death was not an end but a passage to eternal honor. Each Spartan selected had a son alive, ensuring that their family bloodlines would continue even if they fell. This was no accident. It was a king's calculated decision. As the column advanced, they were joined by allies from other cities, 700 Thespians who came willingly, 400 Thebans compelled by duty, and a scattering of other Greeks who believed in the cause. In total, the force numbered perhaps 7,000. To any other people, it might have felt like a respectable army. But against Xerxes' tide of hundreds of thousands, it was a candle in a storm. The Spartans were different from their allies. Where others muttered prayers, the Spartans joked. Where others sharpened blades nervously, the Spartans combed their long hair and polished their armor. It was not arrogance, but ritual, a display of calm that unsettled even their enemies. For Spartans, fear was a stranger. They had been taught since childhood that the body could be broken, but the spirit must remain unyielding. As they reached Thermopylae, the men beheld the narrow pass. Hot springs bubbled nearby, giving the place its name, the Hot Gates. Behind them lay the sea, and before them, cliffs rose steep and unforgiving. The pass was so tight that a chariot could not pass through. This was where Greece would make her stand. Leonidas called his captains together. By torchlight, their shadows stretched across the rocks as he spoke. "We are not here to fight for life. We are here to fight for time. The Persians will come in numbers that blot out the sun, but the sun still sets at the end of each day, and for every day we hold, Greece breathes." The words settled on the men like a mantle of steel. Each soldier knew that his name might soon be etched not on stone tablets, but in the memory of generations. The Thespians swore to remain at the side of the Spartans. The Thebans muttered uneasily, uncertain of their fate. But Leonidas' Spartans needed no reassurance. Their oath was older than this war, older than Persia itself. It was the Spartan oath of eternal loyalty to their king, their comrades, and their land. Meanwhile, across the sea and plains, Xerxes' army approached like a tide of shadows. Reports flooded in, an army so vast it stretched beyond sight. Horses, archers, spearmen, and the dreaded immortals, Persia's elite guard of 10,000 warriors who never allowed their numbers to dwindle. Behind them came slaves, laborers, and servants. The earth shook beneath the march of empire. The contrast could not have been greater. On one side, countless thousands adorned in silks, bronze, and gold, commanded by the most powerful man on earth. On the other, a few thousand warriors in crimson cloaks, their armor simple but unyielding, led by a king who sought no glory for himself. When the Persians finally arrived, Xerxes sent forth a messenger. His demand was simple: lay down your weapons, surrender, and live. It was the offer of mercy, the chance to bend the knee to empire and avoid certain death. Leonidas' reply would echo through eternity: Molenlab, come and take them. The defiance rippled like thunder across the pass. Xerxes, insulted but intrigued, decided to test the Greeks. Surely, a mere handful of men could not withstand the might of Persia. He ordered his Median troops forward, confident they would shatter the defenders in moments. But the Spartans were not ordinary soldiers. As the enemy advanced, Leonidas' men locked their shields in a phalanx, spears jutting outward like the teeth of a beast. When the Medes struck, they crashed against a wall of bronze and discipline. The narrow pass neutralized their numbers. Spears found flesh, shields pushed back, and the Persians fell in heaps. Wave after wave came forward, yet the Spartans held, their movements precise, drilled, and unbreakable. Allies fought alongside them, but it was the discipline of Sparta that formed the backbone of resistance. The pass became a graveyard of Persia's pride. Days passed, and the casualties mounted. Xerxes' frustration grew. He unleashed his immortals, his most fearsome soldiers, clad in scale armor and armed with bows and blades. Yet even they could not break through. The immortals discovered that in the narrow, hot gates, they too could die. Behind the walls of shields, Leonidas' men rotated positions, ensuring that no warrior grew too weary. The allies marveled at their endurance, their unity. Where others would collapse from exhaustion, the Spartans fought as if possessed by something greater than life itself. In their camp at night, they did not despair. They laughed, shared wine, and sharpened their spears by firelight. Death was near, but they welcomed it as brothers. For Spartans, the question was never whether they would die, but whether they would die well. And yet, even as hope flickered among the Greeks, betrayal crept in the shadows. A local man named Ephialtes, greedy for reward, approached Xerxes. He revealed a hidden path through the mountains, a secret trail that would allow the Persians to outflank the defenders. It was the key to breaking Thermopylae, and it was sold for silver. But that knowledge was not yet in Leonidas' hands. For now, he and his men stood defiant, the hot gates echoing with the clash of bronze and the cries of the fallen. For 2 days, the impossible had been achieved. The greatest empire in the world had been halted by a handful of men. Songs were already being whispered in the Greek camp, tales of defiance that would outlive their bodies. But the shadow of betrayal was moving swiftly, and soon, the oath of Leonidas and his 300 would be tested in fire and blood. The dawn broke over Thermopylae in a haze of mist and ash. For 2 days, the Spartans and their allies had held the pass. The Persians, though vast in number, had been repelled again and again. Each attempt to crush the defenders ended in slaughter, the narrow path littered with corpses and broken weapons. The sea breeze carried the stench of death, but also the unshakable sound of Greek defiance. Xerxes sat upon his golden throne, overlooking the battlefield. He had expected an easy triumph, yet now, frustration gnawed at him. His Medes had failed, his immortals had bled, and his army, accustomed to victory, now whispered of the invincible wall of Spartans. The great king, who commanded half the known world, found himself mocked by a few thousand men in red cloaks. It was then that Ephialtes' treachery reached his ears. The hunchbacked Greek, driven by greed and envy, revealed the hidden mountain path around Thermopylae. Xerxes' eyes gleamed with cruel satisfaction. At last, he had the key to victory. Under cover of darkness, he sent his elite troops along the secret trail, guided by Ephialtes. By morning, the trap would close. But Leonidas was not blind. Scouts and local allies brought word of the betrayal. When the king heard it, he did not curse fate nor plead for rescue. He understood at once that the hour had come. The Greeks had fought to delay, and they had succeeded. Now, the Persians would surround them. Retreat was possible, but not for Spartans. To flee was dishonor. To stay was glory. Leonidas gathered his captains and spoke with calm resolve. He ordered the majority of the Greek allies to withdraw before the Persians sealed the pass. Some obeyed, retreating to fight another day, but others refused to leave. The 700 Thespians, led by Demophilus, declared they would stand beside the Spartans until the end. A small band of Thebans also remained, though their loyalty was uncertain. Together with Leonidas' 300, they prepared for the final stand. The hot gates had become a tomb, and the Spartans welcomed it. As dawn broke, the Persians advanced once more, unaware of the betrayal already unfolding in the hills above. This time, Xerxes unleashed his full fury. Arrows darkened the sky, the earth shook with the march of men, and the thunder of drums echoed across the cliffs. The Spartans raised their shields, spears bristling, and braced for the storm. The battle that followed was unlike anything seen before. The Spartans fought with a ferocity that defied imagination. Their phalanx was unbreakable, a living wall of bronze and muscle. Persian soldiers fell in waves, crushed against shields, pierced by spears, and hacked down by short swords when the spears broke. Herodotus would later write that the Spartans fought as though each man were the equal of 10. They moved as one, each warrior trusting the man beside him with his life. When a Spartan fell, another stepped into his place without hesitation. The narrow pass became a killing ground, the rocks slick with blood. Xerxes, watching from his throne, is said to have leapt up 3 times in rage as he saw his men slaughtered. Yet still, the Spartans held. Then came the arrows. Persia's archers unleashed volleys so thick that they blotted out the sun. But instead of fear, the Spartans laughed. One of them famously remarked, "Good, then we shall fight in the shade." Arrows rained down, striking shields and armor, piercing flesh, yet the line did not break. When the Persians charged again, the Spartans hurled themselves forward with renewed fury, driving the enemy back over the heaps of their own dead. The narrow pass amplified every shout, every clash of bronze on steel. It was as if the very mountains echoed with defiance. But as the hours passed, exhaustion crept in. Spears splintered, shields cracked, and bodies bore wounds upon wounds. Still, the Spartans refused to yield. They fought with broken weapons, with daggers, even with their bare hands and teeth when steel failed them. The Thespians matched their courage, dying shoulder to shoulder with their Spartan brothers. And then, the trap closed. From the rear, dust rose on the hills. The immortals had circled behind, guided by Ephialtes. The defenders were surrounded. Death was inevitable. Leonidas stood at the heart of his men, his crimson cloak torn, his armor dented, his face marked with blood and sweat. He looked upon his 300 and saw not fear, but pride. He is said to have raised his voice above the din of battle. "Spartans, eat well, for tonight we dine in Hades." With a final cry, they surged forward. The phalanx shattered, no longer a wall but a storm. Each man fought as if his death would carve a place in eternity. Leonidas himself led the charge, cutting down Persians with relentless fury until he was struck by arrows and spears. The king fell, his body pierced, his spirit unbroken. The Spartans fought to recover his corpse, 3 times driving back the Persians to stand over their fallen king. At last, overwhelmed by sheer numbers, they were pressed onto a small hillock, the last refuge of the defenders. Surrounded on all sides, they fought until the final man fell. When it was over, silence hung over Thermopylae. Thousands of Persian corpses lay piled high, a grotesque monument to Greek defiance. Leonidas and his 300 were dead, but their sacrifice had ignited a fire that no empire could extinguish. Xerxes ordered Leonidas' head cut off and his body crucified, a savage act meant to break Greek spirit. But instead, it did the opposite. Word of the stand at Thermopylae spread across Greece like wildfire. The tale of a few men who had defied an empire inspired unity, courage, and an unshakable will to resist. The hot gates had been lost, but the soul of Greece had been won. The smoke of Thermopylae drifted across the cliffs and sea, carrying with it the scent of fire, sweat, and blood. The ground was littered with broken shields, shattered spears, and the bodies of the fallen. Among them lay Leonidas, king of Sparta, and his 300 warriors, their crimson cloaks darkened by the final sacrifice. For Persia, the pass was won. But for Greece, Thermopylae became something far greater than a battlefield. It became a legend. When word of the stand spread across Greece, it did not bring despair as Xerxes intended. Instead, it ignited a fury. From Athens to Corinth, from small villages to mighty Sparta itself, the story of Leonidas and his warriors was told by trembling voices, by poets, by survivors who had witnessed the impossible. The numbers mattered little. What mattered was the message. Freedom could be defended, even against the greatest empire on earth. Xerxes, though victorious, was shaken. His army had bled far more than he had expected. If a mere handful of Greeks had held him back for days, what might thousands accomplish? Yet he pressed onward, driving his forces into the heart of Greece. Athens fell, its temples burned, the Parthenon desecrated. The city was left smoldering, a warning to all who defied Persia. But the Greeks did not break. Inspired by Thermopylae, they rallied. Themistocles of Athens forged a cunning plan, luring the Persian navy into the narrow straits of Salamis. There, the smaller, faster Greek ships turned the tide of war, crushing Xerxes' fleet and forcing the great king to retreat. A year later, at Plataea, the united Greek army struck a final blow, driving the Persians out for good. And through every clash, every battle cry, Thermopylae was remembered. The sacrifice of Leonidas and his Spartans was not in vain. They had bought the time Greece needed, and with it, they had preserved not just their land, but the ideals of freedom and independence that would echo through history. For the Spartans themselves, Thermopylae became a sacred story. Mothers who had lost sons did not weep, but held their heads high, for their children had died as Spartans should, unbroken, unyielding, defiant. In Sparta, death in battle was honor, and no death was more honored than that of the 300. The Thespians, too, were remembered. Though history often places the spotlight on the Spartans, the 700 Thespians who chose to stay at Leonidas' side shared in that immortal glory. They died not because law commanded them, but because courage compelled them. Their names, too, are etched into eternity. Centuries later, the poet Simonides composed an epitaph for the fallen, carved into stone at Thermopylae itself. It read, "Go tell the Spartans, stranger passing by, that here, obedient to their laws, we lie." Simple words, yet within them lay the essence of Sparta: obedience to duty, loyalty to comrades, and the embrace of death for something greater than self. Thermopylae became more than just a Greek memory. Across time, nations and peoples looked back at that narrow pass and saw themselves reflected in its courage. Generals studied the battle, leaders quoted the words of Leonidas, and soldiers carried the spirit of the 300 into their own wars. From the Roman legions to modern armies, the tale of Thermopylae has inspired those who faced impossible odds. And yet, beneath the legend lies the human truth. Leonidas was not a god, nor were his men invincible. They were flesh and blood, with fears, doubts, and families left behind. Their greatness came not from immortality but from the choice they made, to stand, knowing they would fall, and in that fall, to rise higher than any empire. Xerxes returned to Persia, his dream of conquest broken. His empire endured for centuries, vast and powerful, yet history remembers him not for his triumphs, but for his failure at a small mountain pass against men who refused to yield. The Persians won the battle, but the Greeks won the story. And stories are what survive the longest. Even today, when one speaks of defiance against overwhelming odds, the shadow of Thermopylae looms large. It is more than history. It is myth, symbol, and eternal flame. The Spartans at the hot gates showed that courage is not the absence of death, but the embrace of it, that freedom is worth any sacrifice, and that honor can outlast empires. So, as the centuries turn and the world changes, Thermopylae remains. The pass is quieter now, the hot springs still bubbling, the mountains still watching. But if you stand there in silence, you might hear echoes, the clash of bronze, the cries of warriors, the voice of Leonidas commanding his men to hold, to fight, to die. And in those echoes, you will find the truth, that the immortality of the Spartans was not in their bodies but in their legacy. For as long as men tell stories of courage, the 300 will never fall.